Hello and welcome to my latest video. In this video I'm going to be showing you how to paint a Death Guard Marine from the Horus Heresy, and you can see that it's already been stuck together in primed black. It is a Mark 6 Marine obviously, and it has the resin head from Forge World from one of the upgrade kits. That does mean that because it's resin you should probably spend a little bit longer washing it. I didn't, and actually a little bit later on in the video you might be able to see a few little cracks and things where I had to strip the head and repaint it, but hopefully that won't detract too much from what you're going to see. So to start with, I'm giving the model a coat of Mournfang brown, and it's been thinned with Tamiya X20A just to make it a little bit smoother as it comes out of the airbrush. If you don't want to do this, it's probably better if you have like a brown primer, so like a rattle can primer. Just go straight in with brown and it'll be just as good. So I'm going to use Ionrach skin or Ionrach, whatever it was, but it doesn't matter too much on the exact colour. So it's just kind of like a bony sort of colour. This one's it's a bit more grubby, but if you wanted to use something, say like Morghast bone or any of the bone colours, it really doesn't matter. It doesn't have to be a Games Workshop colour either. What you saw there is as I started spraying it, I got this kind of like speckling effect. It just means I hadn't thinned it enough. So I'm using a 0.4mm needle and around about 30 psi. But when I first started spraying, so you saw the speckling effect. All I did was I took a little bit more of the X20A thinner and just dropped some of that in the airbrush and mixed it all together. Gave it a good spray through, so you have like the mix coming through, and you can see it's coming through a lot more smoothly now. But always remember though, if you're spraying something that's like a really light color, and this is almost white, you've got a much higher chance of getting speckling. White colors are always a pain to work with anyway. Now you might be asking, why don't I just get something like a Wraithbone rattle can spray, just cover it like that? You can if you want, but the thing is, when you are doing this, you will leave some of the brown. Like, you're only picking out sort of the armor panels basically. Now obviously because of overspray, you will get some into other recesses, but you're not spending a long time on it. And also, if your trigger finger is controlled enough, you should be able to get a bit of a transition. So in some of the more recessed areas, like the side of the legs and the underside of the chest, things like that, you don't want like a solid color on them. And then the final airbrush highlight is pure white. Now I've mentioned this before in my videos. If I'm using Vallejo paints, I've taken them out of the dropper bottles and put them into the large old Games Workshop style pots. I think so P3 use them as well. I just prefer those older pots. I find it easier for mixing, taking the exact amount of paint out of them and things like that. Don't feel like you need to do that. It's just a little quirk of mine. There's if you don't find any benefit, or you want to use dropper bottles, or you don't want to spend any money changing paints into bottles for no reason, don't do that. So the final highlight you can see is Vallejo pure white, and this is just a very gentle layer. So this is probably thinned a little bit more heavily than the other colours. That will also help with getting a very smooth finish as well. And all you're doing for this is just picking out basically the head, chest area, shoulder pads, although the smooth shoulder pad is going to be painted green in a moment as well. So don't focus too much on making sure that's nice and neat, because it's a complete waste of time. Just before that though, I'm going to be painting all of the metal parts on the model. This is pretty straightforward. The only thing is, because I'm using Vallejo metal colour, and it is a burnt iron colour, so I think the burnt iron just works a little bit nicer with the Death Guard. It has a tiny bit of warmth in there, and it's quite dark as well. But these metal colours are very, very fluid. So what I do sometimes is I put it into a well palette. You can just see it there to the right hand side, and just leave it a minute or two for it to kind of start to dry out. So the paint's a bit thicker. It still flows really nicely, but if you use it straight from the pot, it'll still cover nicely, but it will the chances of you making a mistake and then that mistake flowing onto other parts of the model are quite high because of the how fluid it is. If it goes into a recess, the capillary action will pull around into that recess, and then you can end up with sparkle paint going everywhere. It's one of the main reasons why I don't actually like painting with metallic paints, because you can get little particles of metallic flakes all over the models. It's just a pain for me to work with. Like, ideally, if you're using metallic paints, you need 2 separate water jars just so that you don't cross contaminate and get metallic flakes in your in the flat colors. Okay, so we painted all of the metal parts on the model, and now I'm just going to quickly paint in the rest of the parts black. Just excuse my head blocking part of the view. Hopefully you can still see enough, but I'm using a contrast paint for this. There's no specific reason, I just happen to have it to hand. If you want to use black paint from like a normal paint pot, like Vallejo model color black or Abaddon black or whatever it is, that's fine. It doesn't make much difference. I just like this because it's a bit more fluid, so it very quickly covers the area, goes into all the recesses and things. It's just a bit quicker. You probably will need to give 2 coats on the shoulder pad, but then again not really, because when I cover it in a moment, you'll see here, I know it looks like Nurgle has infested the model now. A little bit preemptive for the Heresy because he's not quite that corrupted yet, but it's I'm going to be airbrushing over it, so it's just sort of a putty that I've covered all over the model just to protect it from getting any of the any overspray. And so you saw there I'm using Iosen Green. It's very heavily thinned, again with X20A thinner from Tamiya, and it's a really nice green color. This, you don't have to use Iosen Green. It is my favorite green for doing this kind of work, for working on Death Guard. But if you can't get P3 paints or whatever, then something like War Boss Green will be close enough, or maybe even Warpstone Green, I think it is. There's a few different greens anyway, or you could actually mix some greens together. So if you took War Boss Green and added a little bit of yellow to it, it'll get something similar to this as well. But you can see as well I'm doing a bit of a transition, so it's stronger on the front where it takes the most light, and that's where the focal point will be as well. It just happens to be coincidence that the putty that I'm using is green. You don't need to use this kind of putty. It's just like, stress putty or whatever. It's just not very sticky. It doesn't leave any residue on the model. Just really handy for covering something up and while you're spraying with the airbrush. So I've done 1 coat of Iosen Green there, and now I've just added a little bit of Yriel yellow into the mix. So all I've done is just taken a paintbrush, put a bit of yellow from the pot, and mixed it in along with the thinner into the well of the airbrush, and then I'm just airbrushing this on the very front part of the shoulder pad. So you can see a clear transition going from the front where it's nice and bright green, then it goes a bit darker as it fades round. So there we have what is basically a base coloured model, and actually I think it looks quite nice like that. It is very clean though, but if you were going to do like a big army of these, I think if you just left it at this stage, so if you got all the models to this stage, it would be ideal, because they'll look really nice and high contrast on the battlefield, and then you can at your own leisure add all the extra effects that we're going to be adding on now. So one of my favourite things, getting a big pot of sort of wash, shade, whatever, and just saturating the model with it. Big brush. This is a size 4 Artis Opus brush. It doesn't matter too much, but just get a big brush to do it, because you will cover the whole model more quickly. Whatever you do, don't try and use a small brush to do this, because you're not painting it. You want to cover it all while it's wet at the same time. So just be kind of quick while you're doing it. But if it just goes a bit wrong, if it dries too quickly, what you'll find is that when you try and take any excess off, you get coffee stain marks, like little dry patches. But I don't think that matters too much, because it'll just look like staining, weathering effect anyway. Especially for Death Guard, it's not that big of a problem. And because we're going to be adding chipping to it later on, you can make it sort of blend in and hide any sort of dodgy painting effects as it dries. But what you saw there as well is that I used some contrast medium just to go over the top, and quite similar to some of my other videos where I've taken contrast medium and mixed it with contrast paint. So the Mortarion Grime colour that I'm using here, which I thought was an apt colour for the Death Guard, but the Mortarion Grime colour, it's not a contrast paint, but I think the composition of the shade colours is very similar to the contrast. It's basically just a more dilute version. And also basically what I did was I burnt money. I set money on fire because I've used contrast medium, and then I when I added it, I noticed that actually it took away way too much of the colour, so I've had to come back again with the contrast with the Mortarion Grime, and actually gone over areas of the head and chest again. So really I recommend don't bother with the contrast medium unless you also like setting money on fire, but just stick with the Mortarion Grime. Flood the model with it, and then using the large brush, just see where there are pools of the paint, suck it up with the brush. You can actually, if you get enough in the brush, you can sort of put it back into the pot if you're a bit careful as well. And it will only take a couple of minutes just to do that. There you saw I was just about to start painting on some chipping, and well, you're going to see a little bit more, and I'm like, wait a minute, I've done this in the wrong order. But it's Rhinox hide. I am going to be painting some chipping on, but before I do that, because I used the Mortarion Grime on there, the white had been knocked back on it, which now gives me a perfect opportunity to paint on some stronger highlights on the most important parts of the model that for focal points. So in this case on the model, because the arm goes straight across it, it's quite eye-catching, that area. So just picking out like the top facing curves on the model. The white I'm using is still the pure white from Vallejo, and all I'm doing is quite thin down, so it's probably about 2 parts water to 1 part paint, and I'm just painting the brightest areas. Because you'd already taken the highlights up to white when you airbrushed them on, it's very, very close to white, just a bit darker because the Mortarion Grime is not very dark apart from in the recesses, so it's just a little bit darker, but just by adding this it brings a bit of pop to those brightest highlight parts. And when you're applying this, you're always painting towards the highlight, so just a small amount of paint on your brush, but start away from where you want to finish, and you always finish on where you want it to be the brightest part of highlight on the model, because wherever you take remove the brush after you finish the stroke, that leaves a larger deposit of paint, so that area will build up the layer of paint quicker, because it's quite a translucent paint, because it's a thicker layer where you take the brush off, it makes it whiter on that point. This hand here was actually, if you go back to earlier on in the video and you kind of like zoom in, you can see that it was the back of the hand was one of the areas where I'd had a reaction with the primer and the glue, because I'd primed it too soon after gluing it together, and it creates a little crackle effect on there. So what I'd actually done is taken a scalpel and just scraped it off, and then I repainted it by hand, just doing the same thing. So starting with the Mournfang brown, then Ionrach. Wait, let me find the pot. What is it called? Ionrach. Oh, so it's not iron at all. Okay, well, whatever. It'll be in the description. Like I used the Ionrach skin. I don't know what an Ionrach is, but I just glazed that up, and then again with the white afterwards. And I don't think you can tell the difference that easily between the airbrushed parts and the hand painted parts, but ideally you won't do that. But as you can see, you can fix issues if you are a bit of a noob painter like me and you make these silly mistakes of priming something directly after building it. One of the things here as well that the reason that I wanted to paint the white over the top a little bit more is, I'm not sure how clearly it comes across in the video, but the resin head from Forge World, you can still see some of the print lines on top of it. Now, ideally, again, if you were going to, before painting it, you would have sanded those down if you spotted them. Because I was just going through the motions and I didn't pay attention to it, I had already painted it before I noticed that they were there, and it was too late by that time. But with the layers of paint going over the top, it actually hides it. It's not that big of an issue, but again, just something to be aware of. If you're going to get the sort of the resin heads from Forge World, you can sometimes still see print lines on them. And that's not they've printed them off for you. That's the original print that they'll take, and then they make like molds of those, and you get so basically they all look the same. They'll all have the mold lines on. So now I'm actually painting the weathering on like I started before I realised that I'd done it in the wrong order. So it's Rhinox hide, and this is a little bit thicker here, so it's around about 50-50 water to paint. Now, if you've seen any of my other marine videos where I've painted on chipping, I'm probably a little bit more haphazard and kind of like brutal applying the chipping on them, so bigger chips and things. In this, I just wanted to take a little bit more time, just because I like the Death Guard, and it's a slightly different look to the model. So if you compare this to the Imperial Fists I've been doing, they are much more kind of quick, sort of tabletop standard stuff. I mean, this is still tabletop standard stuff, but it's I was just having a bit of fun with it anyway. My preference is when painting is to spend longer on a model, but however, if I do a whole army, like it's rare for me to finish an army anyway. So I thought it's just better to spend just a tiny bit longer, having a bit of fun with it. And that's also the reason why it'll have the glowing red eyes on this. Probably not ideal for painting for a whole army. I am going to do another video with Death Guard, because I do actually have a Death Guard army. It's very sporadically painted, lots of different stages of models with different layers of paint on, but it is an aim to have a proper Horus Heresy playable army, and it was one that I started from the original Horus Heresy release, so it's quite old now. It's mostly resin models, and I'm just adding some of the new plastics to it. And this style of painting doesn't match that closely to it, but the colours are close enough, and at a distance no one's going to pay that much attention. But I will do another video that's going to be a bit quicker for churning out a Space Marine army. Also, I will probably change the colour on the eyes as well. Most of my Death Guard Marines have blue glowing eyes, but I thought because I've already done that on the Imperial Fist videos, I'd just swap it up for this one. But mainly, if I want them all to match, I'm going to have to go back and do the blue glow on. Like this guy will just be extra evil. He's probably definitely going to turn to Nurgle, and he will be a very corrupt Marine, no doubt, in the future. So now I'm highlighting the chips. This is, depending on how many chips, this could be a very slow process and is not really suitable for army painting. This is again just me having a bit of fun. This is probably something you should really reserve more for like the leaders in your army. I do have the two Death Guard Praetors, and I will paint up one of those for YouTube as well. I think the models are fantastic for those, and that will be something where I can actually spend a bit of time and really enjoy myself with it. But it's pretty simple and straightforward. So you've got the Rhinox hide there where you painted all the chipping, and when you're applying the chipping, it's quite important that you sort of focus more towards the edges of things where you get damage, because edges always catch onto something. They get worn very easily. But you will still get chips, obviously, on the flat surfaces. Think of chipping more as painting freehand. So it's an aesthetic result. You're looking for something that looks good. So it doesn't always need to be realistic. And it's a good brush control practice. But, it entirely depends on how much time and how much you enjoy doing that sort of painting. But then I'm just using the same white again, just for picking out the lower edges. Now, if you look on the wet palette in the top left there, you can see there are two different looking whites. Now, if you paid attention before, the white on the left was the one that I used to highlight the armor panels. That's because that's 2 parts water to 1 part paint. That's very heavily watered down. The white that I'm using to pick out the few edges and the lower edges on the chipping, that's a lot thicker. That's more like 50-50 water to paint, maybe even a little bit more paint. You know, try and keep the paint thicker. It's easy to get a sharp line. So here for painting the gun, all I'm doing is neutral grey, Vallejo colour. But if you don't have that, you can mix black and white to get a similar colour, or something like, I think it's Mechanicum Standard Grey is very close as well. All I'm doing is picking out the upwards facing edges on all the black areas. I've painted on some scratches on the chain blade, and then just various scratches and things on the main body of the gun, and also sort of like the lower-ish kind of part of the body. You can see there, just painting sort of like this scratchy kind of highlight on, so it's got a bit of a transition going from black to grey at the bottom, so black at the top to grey at the bottom. It just helps give it a bit more body to the look of the weapon, because the highlights, it's very easy for them to get lost. Like, I mean, if you wanted to do sort of like heavy metal style edge highlights, you do like a few more layers in this, and they become a bit bolder, so the outline of the weapon becomes much clearer. But because I'm a bit lazy and I'm only using one colour for the edge highlight, and then a couple of dots of white just to pick out the odd scratch here and there, by painting on highlights on the main body of the gun, it just sort of, it does a similar thing that the larger edge highlights will do, in that it just fills in the area a bit rather than just leaving it very black. So now just to paint on some quick highlights on the chipping on the shoulder pad, and for this I'm using Moot Green. If you don't have Moot Green, you can just add you can add ice yellow, you can add a bit of white and yellow to it. It's a lighter colour, it's with a bit of yellow and a bit of white on top of the Iosen Green. And it's exactly the same process again, just picking out the lower edges just to give that sort of like 3D pop to it. Because it's the light catching the lower edge. It's not necessarily super realistic. Like if you see chips in real life, they don't look that three-dimensional. Some of them do if like they're really bad, like the paint's peeling off, but mostly chips just look like dark marks on things. So there you saw magically the transfer appeared on the shoulder, and there's one on the leg as well. Now, like I didn't show you how to do the transfers. It's so common on how to do them, but just in case you are interested, first of all, put a gloss varnish on the shoulder, then use some microset. Don't bother with microsol, complete waste of time. Put some microset down on the shoulder, put the decal on top of that, put more microset on it. Leave it to set for a couple of hours, so it should still be a bit damp. Take a cotton bud, roll it over the top. That'll just push out any air bubbles or anything like that. Then leave it to dry overnight. The chemical reaction will eat off the plastic film. You should have a perfectly smooth, flat transfer by then. And then what you saw there was, so normally what I would do would then give it a coat of gloss varnish and a coat of matte varnish after that, and that would just make it look flawless. But I didn't bother. I just gave it a coat of the Mortarion Grime, and that has a similar effect in that because it has the same paint finish as the other paint. Like, it's got Mortarion Grime all over the model, so you're basically evening out the finish all over with it. And actually, it did a really good job of covering the shoulder pad, so you couldn't see that there was you couldn't see the edge of the transfer on there. So that worked fine, and that was just me being a bit lazy. But ideally, I would say put a gloss varnish over the top once the transfer has dried, and then you can either put some sort of medium on top or a matte varnish, and it will hide the gloss basically. So now I'm painting the red eyes, and this is something again but I'm just painting on for fun. As I said, like normally I would have painted them blue. I cannot remember from the lore perspective what colour the eyes are supposed to be on Death Guard. It might be they're supposed to be red, but like I do this quite often on when I'm painting Marines. I completely ignore the background for when I'm painting the eyes, especially if they're OSL. I think the Imperial Fists also are supposed to have red eyes, and it's quite funny now because I see so many people have painted Imperial Fists with blue eyes because I keep painting all my, like I've been doing it for years, like for a long time. Probably second edition I think I started giving my Space Marines my Imperial Fists blue eyes, and now I see so many people that have painted blue eyes, and the reason is because it's a good contrast with the blue and yellow, but I think technically they should have red eyes, and I can't remember what colour the Death Guard eyes are supposed to be. So here I'm putting on the glow effect. Now what you probably find is you're going to struggle a little bit with getting this glow effect on the problem is it's because it's a white base. Normally if it's a darker colour, it's much easier to put a glow effect on. What you're going to find is it's going to look a bit pink. If you look in the top left there on the wet palette, there are two reds. It's both the same colour. It's Mephiston red. The first Mephiston red in the bottom left, that was what I used to fill in the eye sockets. The Mephiston red in the top right, this is watered down quite heavily, so around about 3 or 4 parts water to 1 part paint. And I'm just very quickly glazing upwards towards the eye. The paint is, because of the Mortarion Grime, it's left quite a satin finish, so the paint sort of sits on the surface a bit more. If I'd given the model a coat of matte varnish, so I do this on other Marine videos, it would have made this process a little bit easier because the paint sort of sucks into the very soft texture left by the matte varnish. But here because it's a satin finish, I've made life a little bit harder for myself, but it doesn't matter too much. Now, it might be that you get a bit bored doing this. You will need to do like 4 or 5 coats of it, but the thinner you do and the more coats you do, the smoother the transition. If you just get a bit bored, just go in with the make the paint a little bit thicker and go over it. You can as well do a transition, but just be careful, because if you start mixing whiting with the red, you're going to end up with a pink transition going into the look of the armor, and it might not work as well. You really need to get like the red saturation around the eyes, because I'm now painting over the internal parts of the eyes, first of all with Troll Slayer Orange, which is again in the wet palette you see top left there, in the bottom left that's Troll Slayer Orange. Now Troll Slayer Orange has awful coverage, but it is a really nice orange colour. You could try using Fire Dragon Bright, that has much better coverage, however it's more of a pale orange, whereas the Troll Slayer Orange is very sort of like orange, like it's proper red mixed with yellow. Again, you don't have to use Troll Slayer Orange, you could just mix red and yellow. You can see on the wet palette there that I have both red and yellow there, so I could have mixed it myself as well, but I didn't. And all you're doing is just, again, it's going to be around about 3 layers probably, just going over the eye. Leave a little recess all the way around so you can see some of the Mephiston red in the, like I say, in the recesses, because that will help to give a bit of definition to it. You can already sort of see the glow effect starting. I'm also going to do a quick edge highlight going all the way around the eye. Just be careful with how you do this. You don't want to get the paint going into the recess, so the paint needs to be a little bit thicker. If the paint's too thin, it will very easily, you'll get that capillary action again, and the paint will suck into the recess and go all the way around the eye. Whereas, if you get it just the right sort of thickness, I'd say around about 50-50 water to paint, and just using the very tip of the brush, and don't put too much paint on the brush either. The nice thing about these Death Guard heads is that it's basically, so it looks like they've got 2 eye lenses, but it's actually 1 eye lens. They connect in the middle, and they're really big as well, so you have a lot of space. These are much bigger lenses than most of the eyes on modern Marines. So it's ideal for doing this kind of painting. But also, if you don't want to do the OSL effect, and I will paint some Marines where it's actually, where I paint the lenses as just like little reflections, how everyone has like the little white dot and the highlights around them and things. Really good for that as well, just because they're so big, so it's easy to get your brush in there. But there you can see I'm now putting in the highlight for the yellow. Again, just going straight over the top of the Troll Slayer orange, so this is Yriel yellow, but it's a smaller area, and so you can still see the orange around the edges of that. That just helps with the glow effect as well, and also a little bit of the yellow on the bottom of the eye, but don't take it around too much. It's mainly the center of the eye that you want to be the bright white hot sort of dot. That's gonna make it, you know, look really sort of strong from the glow effect. This is the light source, and this is why it's important to have the red all the way around, because that's the only reason that you're seeing that they look like the glowing red. If you took that red away, you've basically got orange eyes, and it's this final highlight here that really adds the punch. So it's just the white little dot in the middle, and there you can see like how sort of high contrast and super glowy it is. So you can see the two eyes, one without the white dot, and see how much of a difference that white dot makes. Then finally here, all I'm doing is just picking out a few elements on the gun, or any of the metal surfaces really, just to sort of pick them out as highlights. So it's just using, again, the Vallejo metal color burnt iron, and it's, you know, because you've had the Mortarion grime over the top, one, that's made it a bit more matte than so when you paint the metal color down first, it's quite shiny with the shade over the top of it. It makes it more matte, so when you apply it again, you get shiny points on it, and also the Mortarion grime dulls it down a little bit. If you find when you added the Mortarion grime it wasn't quite dark enough in places, feel free to go back and just sort of kind of like recess, like put lines in the recesses, just go over the top of parts on the model, particularly on any of the metallic areas. I went back and did it on the what's it called, the bit that you put in the gun that has the bullets in. You know, I put a bit more of the you know, the Mortarion grime over the top of that, just to make it a bit darker, and also on sort of like the joints between, like the elbow joints and the back of the knees and things like that, just to make it a little bit darker in those areas. But that's pretty much it. The only other thing is that I used some Forge World dark sand weathering powder on the feet. Now I didn't fix it with, so, like, if you want you can airbrush a quick coat of matte varnish on just so that it doesn't rub off. However, whatever you do to fix the powder to the feet will basically turn it into paint. It won't have that very sort of strong dusty look to it. You can, in a previous video I mixed in some of the weathering powder with some matte varnish, and as long as you only do a very small amount, it, you know, that does help fix it as well. But my reasoning is I'm not going to be touching the legs or the feet area on the model, so it's not really going to be an issue for me. You know, just pick them up by the base rim or the top of the model. But if you do feel that you need to fix it, then just use a very gentle coat of matte varnish, and that should do the job. But anyway, that's the end of the video. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you very much for watching. Like I said, there's lots more marine videos coming, but I'm also going to be filling in some other things to paint as well, some that I'm not allowed to talk about at the minute, but you know, that's for in the future. Like I said, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.